Hi, this is Miron Bereket from Inspiring Innovation, and you're listening to the Empowered Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm your host, Ellery Wells, and it is a really cold day at the very end of January in 2014. But that's another story for another time. This is the podcast, however, that is designed to help you build yourself up, grow the skills that you need, and develop the abilities that will help make you successful. As your host, I interview people from all walks of life to help you accomplish that goal. Before we get too far with today's episode, I wanted to share a couple reviews that I got and send out some thank yous. In iTunes, a 5-star review came from Vic Vell. I assume that's how you might say it, Vicvel. This person said, "So glad I found the Empowered Podcast. I only recently learned of Ellery Wells' podcast and have been enjoying catching up on what I've missed. Ellery conducts his interviews in an insightful and interesting manner. Both his guest and his interview style are excellent. I'm looking forward to hearing more and to getting together in person soon." I love that review. Thank you so much for the review. Insightful and interesting. Those are pretty high comments, and I'm very grateful. And if that's you, send me an email, ellery@empoweringthe80%.com, and that's 80%.com. Just tell me what you like about the show, who your favorite guest is, and maybe we can meet for lunch sometime. I'm in the Austin area and always looking forward to meeting people who I've connected with online. The second review comes from Ashley30, and I have to apologize to Ashley. She left this review on Stitcher a month ago, and I didn't even know that you could leave 5-star reviews, or any review for that matter, on Stitcher, so I just found this. So I do apologize, but Ashley30 says, "Great content from unique perspectives. I love this show. The unique guest partnered with interesting discussions create awesome content that everyone can relate to. Excellent to listen to and learn from." Thank you very much, Ashley. If you'd like to leave me a rating and review on for the show, you can go to empoweredpodcast.com, and there are iTunes and Stitcher links right there that will take you directly to my show pages on each one of those. And, I'm on a lot of other platforms, but those two are the biggest. Another thing that I wanted to mention before we get into our interview for today is my coaching. In the last podcast, I mentioned that I've opened up a few spots to do professional coaching. If you are stuck and you don't know exactly how to focus on your ideas and you're looking for someone to guide you to the success that you know you deserve, go to empoweringthe80%.com/coach. Fill out some short information. You and I will connect on the phone or via Skype, and we'll see if your needs are something that I can help you with. Also, one last thing. If you would like to do an intro for the show, I would love to hear one, and I think those are always a big hit. If you go to empoweredpodcast.com on your desktop, or on your mobile phone, actually, on the right side, you'll see a blue bar that says, "Leave Ellery a voicemail." Click on that, leave me a voicemail, say, "Welcome to the Empowered Podcast." I'd love to hear it. If you're listening to the show from one of these exotic locations and want to leave an intro or a hello message in whatever native language that might be, that would be really cool too. We have listeners in the UK, Australia, Canada, Japan, Guatemala, Sweden, Hong Kong, Vietnam, France, Trinidad and Tobago, and about 35 more other countries. And that's so cool to know that my show is helping people in those countries outside of the United States. So without further delay, we'll go right into today's episode with the Conscious Millionaire, J.V. Crum III. Thank you for tuning into the Empowered Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of sharing this conversation that I'm having right this moment with J.V. Crum III, who is the best-selling author of The Conscious Millionaire, Grow Your Business and Make a Difference. How are you doing today, JV?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Just so my listeners know, whenever I hear someone's name or the name of a book or hear it the first time, I take notice. And it's kind of like, oh, okay. But then the second time, I pay a little bit more attention. And by the third or fourth time, I know it's the stars aligning, or there's a reason that I'm coming across paths with a book or a person, and that's how I came across you, JV. And I'm so glad to be able to talk to you about your book and about your history, where you've come from, and then where you're going over the next few months.
That sounds great, and I appreciate you having me on.
You're very welcome. So why don't you give us a little background of the history of you and your success journey? I've read a little bit of your material, and we'll talk about your book here in a few minutes. But give us a little background about growing up and some of the challenges that you faced along the way, and then your famous declaration of, I want to be a millionaire.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I grew up actually in the center of Florida in a little town, probably with 300 or 400 people. I mean, it was a very little town on a big lake, about 4 by 5 miles. It was so small that there was this little hardware store, and in the back corner there was a 10 by 10 space that was the post office. So that kind of gives you a feel for the size of this little village, actually. And basically everybody there just was kind of in financial survival mode. I mean, nobody really had any money. We just were always having struggles financially. I mean, having a hard time, with ends meeting. And by the time I was 5 years old, I just had this moment of awareness that was incredibly profound because it changed my life. And this moment, and I said, when I grew up, I'm going to be a millionaire. And I ran in the house, and I looked up at my parents' little boy voice, and I go, when I grow up, I'm going to be a millionaire. And the first thing that happened shocked me. It was so strong that I've never forgotten it. My mother looked at me and shook her fingers, and she said, don't tell anybody. And it wasn't until I sat down to write this book that I realized what was going on in that moment. Well, we were really good church-going people. We lived across the street from the church. We went to church 3 times a week, and my parents had very strong ethics. And also, it turns out they had a belief system that probably had a lot to do with us having financial struggles, that there was something wrong with having too much money. And a lot of people probably listening today at some level have a belief that's hindering them from achieving the financial success that they want, just like my parents did. My parents were incredibly intelligent, and that's the part I couldn't figure out. It's like, here I had very smart parents. I grew up in a house where they were reading a book a week. We took magazines, and I'm going, how is it that basically we're broke half the time? And so I made a decision, I'm not going to live like this. I'm going to grow up, my life's going to be different. And by the time I was 5, and by the time I was 8, I can remember sitting around in my imaginary world, taking out paper and sketching floor plans for mansions. I really even knew what $1 million was, but I had this concept that if I had that much money, all my financial problems would be taken care of. And that was really my goal. So in graduate school, it was kind of interesting because you're thinking, well, this guy is not on a route to becoming a millionaire. Here I am, 21, 22-year-old, living out in Los Angeles in a horrible little studio apartment. I didn't have any money. I was working. I was paying for grad school. At this time, I was doing a master's in clinical psych. And for a solid year, I ate on $5 a week. That's all I had, and I did every overtime that I could get. I mean, I was like just scrambling to pay the little car payment, the little studio payment. I remember it was $165 at the time, which, for me was like, oh my gosh, that was so much money. I had my own place, but it was $165. And I had $5 a week for food, and I had to figure out a strategy. And at that point, I actually called it a strategy. Downtown LA, there was this Central Market that was kind of for the poor people, which certainly included me. And I would park 2 blocks away because it was 40 cents for a half hour. I couldn't afford to park right near it. And I'd run down there. I was in great shape, 163 pounds, worked out 5 times a week. And I ran down there, and I would buy all my food. And then I went, and I noticed, there's all this Mexican food in L.A. So I talked to the Mexican women in the grocery store because it dawned on me the Mexican food's pretty cheap. I mean, it's beans, it's flour tortillas, some lettuce. How much? What's in a basic burrito? And I learned how to cook Mexican food, and that's how I made it through that year. And at one point during that year, I used to go driving in Beverly Hills, and I look at the big mansions because I mean, my dream was big. My dream was.
Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah. I would actually take my off days when I was off from work, and I would drive through Beverly Hills, and I would look at all these big, beautiful mansions, and I dreamed that, I had this big dream. I was going to be a millionaire. Now, obviously, my circumstances were not exactly congruent with that, but it didn't bother me. But I had this yellow Datsun B210, and the reason I had to remember is that it was by $100 the cheapest car in America. And my payment was like maybe $107 a month. It was something like that. It was 105, 107. One day, it was another profound experience, like I'm just not on the right track. So I came up to this 4-way stop in Beverly Hills with these looming, mansions. And there I was in this yellow Datsun B210, and I came up to the stop first. And then within a few seconds, at each one of those other stops came a Rolls Royce. So 3 Rolls Royces.
Wow. And
my little yellow Datsun B210. I tell you the truth, I wanted to crawl under the seat. So embarrassed. I went, oh my God, this is horrible. What kind of life am I living? And I kept thinking, I belong in one of those cars. I am in the wrong car here. This is not the life I'm supposed to be living. So you kind of fast forward a little bit. My dad was having a lot of trouble with his companies, and I flew home because I was working on finishing my graduate degree. I had to write a thesis paper. So I flew back to Florida from California for a whole month. And my dad kept saying, look, will you please come and do some business with me? I've got a contract, but the businesses are having a hard time. And now here's the interesting thing. Here I've become an entrepreneur. I coach entrepreneurs every week, and yet I didn't take a single business class. I'd never read a business book or article. I wanted nothing to do with business because I was convinced, you talk about mindsets, having grown up in a family where my father was an entrepreneur and we were always on a rocky road. Some years, actually, things would start to turn up, go in the right direction, and then the next year, everything would fall apart. And so my father said, will you come and help me? Well, I knew nothing about business, nothing, zero. But I really cared about my dad. I mean, we had a very deep relationship, and I said, well, I'll come for 6 months because I wanted to go to law school. I didn't know how I was going to pay for it, but I wasn't worried about that. I was just like, okay, that's really what I think I want to do. And it was like a duck to water. I started working with Dad, and then the first 3 months, I kept a notebook, and I started noticing what was working, what wasn't. It was a trucking line, regional trucking line, which actually had nothing to do with what I had planned to do with my life because I was all about personal empowerment, all this clinical psych thing, personal growth. I mean, all of this was kind of the track that I was on in California. So I'm paying attention to all of this, and I'm dispatching the trucks, and a lot of things kind of came together in about 3 months in terms of my own awareness of just how bad this was. Because I couldn't figure it out. We were pulling hundreds of loads a week, and we didn't have any money in the bank. It was like the money was just funneling right out of the bank as soon as it got there. And I sat down. I was always good with numbers, and I sat down and I just wrote out the numbers and started adding them and trying to look at the last few weeks and figure, well, what happened here? And there was this eureka moment. And I called my dad on the phone. I went, oh, Dad, I figured it all out. And I didn't know what cash flow was. I'd never heard of that. And so I said, Dad, we're taking in less money every week than we pay out. That's why we're broke. Now, that sounds a little, maybe a little simple.
That's usually part of it.
It's like, that's your big awareness? Well, yeah, because then I could do something about it. It was like, it's like now I have my hands around it. We're just paying more than we're taking in as revenue. So that next Monday, I also sat and I said, okay, well, what are we going to do about this? And I realized that there were less trucks than what people were needing, that there was this high demand for trucks. Now, maybe if I had some business classes, I might have known, that kind of gave me permission earlier to raise the rates. But I kind of sat on my own. I said, well, if there's not enough trucks and we're not charging enough to stay in business, and we can't stay in business anyway, so we have nothing to lose, we might as well call them and ask for more money. And I was kind of 22. I was pretty brazen. So Monday morning, I called up all the different customers and I said, we can't stay in business charging these rates. And they needed trucking. I said, we're going to have to charge more money. And I got as much as 25% rate increases. Then I realized all the suppliers who were supplying tires, parts for trucks and trailers, that, to be blunt, they were basically taking extreme advantage of my dad because he didn't keep track of any of this. He didn't write down what something should be. He would just get the bill and then he owed it, and rather than negotiate anything. So I started meeting with all the suppliers and I told them, look, you're charging too much money. So the customers were paying too little and the suppliers were charging too much. And I said, we got to do something about this. So I need you to give me new bids. And by the way, I'm going to take bids from other people as well. And I did. And very quickly I got that under control. And then my next awareness was, this is all in a month that all this happened. I said, well, our trucks, every time they go in, they stay for days. We lose all the loads. And we get these big bills. So I said, Dad, we need to start a maintenance company. So we leased a building and an acre, and I hired 2 mechanics and put together a preventative maintenance program. When I sat down and asked them, what should we be doing? They said, oh, you need to do this, this, and this. And I said, well, that makes sense. And all of a sudden, our repair bills just, fell tremendously. And then I discovered, I was getting all the mail, that there were 9 years worth of liens on the company. So you're like going, okay,
Ouch.
What are we going to do about this? Well, it turned out I did what you're supposed to do. I just didn't know it. I would sit there and I go, okay, now that we're getting more money in the bank every week as opposed to losing and having nothing there, I started to be able to get a sense that, okay, a week from now we'll have $10,000 in the bank that we didn't have today. So I started calling these people and saying, well, look, you've had this outstanding lien for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. I'll pay you 20 cents on the dollar if you'll take the lien off. Well, they were happy because they didn't expect to get anything. And I was happy because I wanted to get the company straightened out. So by the end of the year, we got rid of all the liens. We had our own maintenance company. We had a 6-figure profit. And all of a sudden, things had changed tremendously. And within 3 years, we had as much as $100,000 profit in a month. And I bought what at the time was a really dream home, a brand new 4-story luxury townhouse, got a Mercedes. I was living on the water. And so I had a tremendous turnaround from 22, being in a little Datsun B210 with 3 Rolls Royces across from me from a 4-way stop, to living on the best street in Tampa. And my life had completely changed in that short period of time.
Could you almost say that the business was successful except for a couple minor tweaks that you came in? I mean, you put in a lot of work, but someone else who has a mirrored or similar type business and they're thinking maybe, we're about to go under.
Let me tell you the things that I really did. First of all, when I sat down and I started writing this book, I asked myself that, what was it that you did? Because everybody can replicate success. I spent a lot of time studying what other people are doing so I can go to my next level. So everything can be replicated. So first of all, I said, what was the process? Because there was clearly a process I was doing. And a lot of times when you're caught up in something, you don't know what it is. I was just paying attention to what seemed to work, what didn't work, and I make changes. So when I created a formula, and it's called the Formula for Creating Wealth. Everybody on this call can use this formula, and you literally can use this formula to achieve anything you want, any level of wealth. The first step is to be conscious. And I realized that being conscious is very important because it's specific, conscious of what do you want and why is it important and who's going to help you get there and how are you going to get there. So what do you want? Well, in my case, I wanted to make the company profitable. I wanted to start having money in the bank, and I wanted to take care of all these liens. I wanted to make the company in a year. I wanted to be doing well. And why was that important? Because our family was always having financial problems. I wanted my parents to live well, and I wanted to live well. I wanted to change our circumstances. That was very important to me. And who was I going to get to help me? Well, here we had owner-operators, we had drivers, ultimately we had customers. Actually, all these people ended up helping in their own way by contributing to our being able to build the company. And then how was I going to get there? Actually, it was by paying attention to what was working and what wasn't working and constantly making adjustments. So then the second step is to focus on what it is, the result you want. And then the third step is to only take actions that will move you in that direction. And probably everybody listening has some stuck point therein that the solution is no more complicated than my solution of realizing we were just not charging enough. And then we were paying our suppliers too much.
Well, I don't know if changing your thinking is all that simple. I have a degree in psychology. It's not a master's degree, but you and I both know from going through that course of study that part of being human, or the higher levels of human thinking, is the thinking about thinking. And that's, to me, that's what you're talking about. You have to think about thinking, or you have to go through the act of thinking about how you're going to think of how to approach a problem, and that can be very difficult. I don't come across too many people that sit down, and maybe this is the key, people that sit down and say, all right, I'm going to plan, I'm going to think, I'm going to consciously select who I will and will not spend time with, what I will and won't read. At one level, it is very simple to do that, but on another, it's very difficult to think about the act of thinking. Do you agree?
Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying, and maybe we should split this up into, there's the strategic part, which is thinking about thinking. All right? And that's really the conscious part that I'm talking about. And then there's the psychology of the mindset, which really sets your ceiling of where you can go. We go back and we look at my parents, great people, very intelligent, but there was clearly a belief system that having too much money, or much money probably at all, was kind of evil, kind of wrong. It meant that you weren't a good person. And that held them back, when the truth is, as I've come to understand it, the more wealth that anyone creates, because wealth is created by adding value to other people's lives, the bigger the difference it is that you're making in the world. That's how I now look at it. But that's definitely a big transition. So one part is the strategic part of thinking about thinking, but the other part is, how is your mindset and your beliefs even set up? And when I work with entrepreneurs, the first place I start is working on what's going on with your mind, because until we change that, all the strategies in the world aren't going to matter, because you're going to self-sabotage yourself and keep them from working. And you're going to self-sabotage because it's outside your comfort zone. It's outside of what you believe is right for you. And a lot of that's not even conscious yet.
Do you think part of that self-sabotage is the people you spend time with?
I think, absolutely. This is why I think it's so critical. I realized, I guess it was about 3 years ago, I'm thinking about the dinner table that I was at, that I was talking to a friend, and he was a highly successful person, but he'd never thought about it this way. I said, I have criteria for who I want in my life.
Can you share what that is?
Sure. I only want people who are highly positive. I only want people who care about other people. To me, becoming wealthy is not a selfish journey. It's actually a journey of giving and caring and making your difference. I want people in my life who want to do something with their life that is important, that is going to matter. I only have people in my life who are focused on a success level. So people who are on a journey that matters, these are the people I hang out with, because I'm all about a big vision of changing the world, changing people's lives, whether it's through Conscious Millionaire, or I have a nonprofit I work with youth called Conscious World Foundation. So I have the group of people that I integrate with there, who are all about changing youth and changing the future and creating a world in which everybody can win, and that everybody takes responsibility for giving back to the world. So those are the kinds of people that I hang out with, and those are very clear criteria. I don't have anybody in my life, anybody who's negative and complains about life because I don't want to listen to it. That will bring you down so quickly because whatever are your priorities is what you're going to put your energy into. I want people with positive priorities in my life because that's who I am, and it brings me up by being around them. I think an easy litmus test is when you're with somebody and then you part and you go your way for the rest of the day. Do you feel uplifted from having been with them, or is it a relief that you're no longer with them? And if it's relief, then maybe they should be exiting your life.
What would you say to the person, and this is not me, but I've had similar conversations with people, and they say, well, me not wanting to hang out with so-and-so, that's just, arrogance or wrong, or I'm not going to turn my back on somebody. What would you say to that person? And then a second question, how would you handle it if that negative person or the person who's not pushing you forward, what if that's a family member, a brother, sister, or...
I've had that situation asked to me, and I've had to make those same decisions. I think the answer to the family one, let's take that because that's the more difficult one. Because probably everybody has somebody in their family they really don't want to spend time with. I mean, unless they just have... I mean, let's be serious.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. And as adults, we are now in a different situation than we were as children. The problem is people continue to act like they're victims or they have to. So some of this takes some very hardcore honesty with yourself. And I want to interject, it also takes multiple layers. What I mean by that is I can remember back 10, 15 years ago the kinds of things I was cleaning up then. There are things I'm now cleaning up in this year that I've had some people exit my life this year, and it was all around the same issues that I was cleaning up. So it's not an absolute all or nothing is what I want to say. It's a layered thing where you clean up this part, you become aware, you know what? Ask yourself, what are you unwilling to tolerate? What will you not tolerate from other people anymore? And for most people, wherever their stage of their journey is, there'll be something that becomes real clear. Oh, I'm just not willing to tolerate naggers anymore. And then all of a sudden you'll become aware of the naggers in your life and you'll go, okay, these people have to leave. And I've gone through actually sitting down with friends and going, I don't enjoy your nagging, and if we're going to spend time together, because nagging was one of those things I got rid of a long time ago. But the most recent one was a whole different thing, where I was taking responsibility for other people's shortcomings, and that was costing me staying awake till midnight, doing extra work, redoing work, whether somebody worked with me or they worked, they were outsourced. I was constantly taking responsibility for other people's shortcomings because I wanted to help them with their growth. And then I finally realized, you know what? I can't build what I want to build if I'm having to spend a lot of time and energy taking responsibility for things that other people are not completing that they should be completing. So that became in a moment of awareness. And I'm just sharing this because everybody will have personal ones, and so I find it useful to share something that's going on with me, is that I had to make a decision that I would no longer be responsible for other people's shortcomings. I had enough of my own to be responsible for. I couldn't be responsible for theirs. And therefore, I had to have adult conversations. That's what I call them. Adult conversations where you straightforwardly say, you either have to do this or we can't continue to journey together. Because I can't continue to either tolerate this or deal with this or take responsibility for this. You're going to have to do that yourself. And then that gives people an opportunity, a moment of awareness to decide, are they wanting to make a change? Because remember, we're all on journeys. And so sometimes the kindest thing you can do is have a really hard heart-to-heart conversation with a friend and say, this doesn't work for me anymore. I'm changing my life. I'd like for us to still be able to be friends. I just can't have this in my life because it drains me. And then they're in a position to make a decision as to what they want. And I remember 6 years ago having that same kind of conversation with a friend. And they told me, if you really accepted me, you would just accept that I'm a very negative person. And I said, I do accept you're a negative person. And I'm accepting that I don't want to be around your negativity.
Yeah.
And so
I guess.
so it was almost like if you were good, and said, if you were a really good friend and you just let me be negative and we could still be friends. And I said, I'm being a good friend by saying I'm not willing to be around that anymore. So would you like to change, or should we just not agree we're not going to be friends? And the person said, no, I'm not going to change. And I said, that's fine. It's your choice. I'm not going to tolerate that anymore. So I guess we're not going to be hanging out. But we were both very civil about it. It was it was a very useful conversation to have. The family thing, I want to address that because that was the harder one. I've made decisions. There are like a number of family people that I've just decided I don't hang out with anymore. I mean, we're adults. And if being around a family member is really that unpleasant because of their behavior,
just because
you
they're
have
family.
to make a decision. Okay, they're family, but does that mean that I'm responsible to spend the rest of my life having them behave this way and treat me this way when I wouldn't accept it from a friend? So in my case, it is hard to make those decisions, but there are family members that I just don't hang out with anymore because I just don't like the way they behave.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, do I want to suffer through hanging out with this person, whether they're family or not, or maybe even specifically because they're family?
Right.
Do I want to say, man, the last few hours or days has been miserable, or do you want to look back in 2 or 3 years and say, man, I'm in the same place that I was 3 years ago, and all I've done is suffer through Uncle Tom's BS or whatever? Or do you want to spend those 3 years?
I agree. Well, I mean, I think one of the tricky things, and this comes to belief systems again, when you look at how many of us have, I had to work through this belief system. I bet a lot of people listening have this belief system that because they're family, somehow we have a whole different set of criteria, and families, this thick blood, and we just have to tolerate family members. And I came to an awareness, and I said, for me, I'm not going to let that be true anymore. I'm going to say why instead. The big why for me became, why should I put up with something that I wouldn't put up with from another friend, like someone being abusive. Like, I don't hang out with people who are abusive because I'm not abusive, and I don't want somebody abusing their wife or their husband or boyfriend or their children. And if that's the way they want to behave, I'm not going to hang out with them. It's not how I want to show up in life, and it's not the people I want to be around. So if somebody's a family member and they're abusive, why would you tolerate that any more than you would tolerate it from any other friend?
Yeah, we have a choice.
And that is really the most important thing probably we could discuss, is that we are consciously at choice once we become consciously aware of our priorities. Mm-hmm. And when I'm working with entrepreneurs, a lot of times I realize that people don't have clear priorities. They really aren't clear with themselves about what's most important. Because if you look at someone's behavior and it never lies. So if somebody tells me something's important to them, but in 7 days, and they want to do it every day, but in 7 days they can't find time to do it, I say, I think that you're in love with the idea of that, but I don't think it's a real priority for you at all. Because if it was a real priority, you would have found time to do it in 7 days.
Yeah.
Now that's okay, but get clear with yourself about what your real priorities are, because if your real priority is becoming a millionaire, I can tell you that anybody listening to this, if it's their real priority and they're willing to do whatever it takes, and I'm here to tell you, I'm not going to give you the sugar-coated view. It takes work. It takes work. That said, anybody who's determined to become a millionaire can get there in 3 to 10 years. I am convinced anybody can do it in that length of time. I mean, I did it in 3 years, turning around a mess, but I had a mess to turn around. Some people have to start something. Some people are going to take a little slower path. But, people say, how long is it going to take me? And I'm going 3 to 10 years if you're totally focused and it's your really big priority. At 5, I made it my priority. I had no idea how I was going to get there. At 22, I was, on this 4-way stop with 3 Rolls Royces. And at 25, I was living on the best street in town in a new luxury townhome with a Mercedes in the garage.
So you're saying 3 to 10 years, and we just talked about the conscious part. What's part two of that equation.
Yeah, and so part two is getting really clear on a specific measurable result. That's your focus. People talk about goals. I talk about results. And the reason is, even though I discuss goals because it's a nice way to start a conversation, then I quickly turn it to, well, what results do you want? Here's what I found. Most people, and especially at the beginning of the year, have all these goals, but the goals are things they kind of hope and wish they'll get to. But if they have results that they're committed to, then they can focus on the result they want and only take actions that will achieve it. And I work in threes. And in my own case, the first 6 months of this next year, I have only 3 goals. When I work with people, I go, you can only have 3 goals. You have 3 goals for 12 months in your company. You have 3 goals at any time. And those goals are results that you are such high priority that you're going to be really focused on achieving those, and then all these other things along the way get aligned with it because you have sub-goals. But everything's supporting these 3 outcomes. And that's when people can really get a lot accomplished. That it's the principle of less is more. When I find people have 100 goals for the next 6 months, I'm going, you're lost. It won't happen. You've got to get clarity, and it has to be specific and measurable in order for you to accomplish anything. Because otherwise your mind has no idea where you're going. The difference between I want to make more money this year and I'm going to make $100,000 more than I made last year, or $250,000 more than I made last year. Or I'm going to take what I made last year and I'm going to make it in the first 3 months. Look, you're going to work hard anyway, so you might as well work hard to accomplish things that are worth accomplishing.
I
It
like
doesn't take
that.
any more work.
Yeah.
It just takes thinking about things on a different level. It means you might need to leverage your relationships differently than you did in the past. Maybe you need to call 10 people every week and ask them if they have this information or if they know someone who you could connect with instead of one person a month. So you might have to change the scale at which you're doing things.
Yeah, if you have a whole bunch of goals or things on your list, I think a lot of people will, man, I've got 97 things to do. Well, I'll just go back and sit on the couch or whatever, And by having the 3, like you said, I think that's a good idea. Not only does it really force you to prioritize, but it also gives you, or it reduces, the sense of feeling overwhelmed, and that's good. So conscious and focused.
Focus on your results. And here's the important thing about actions. And when I'm speaking to an audience, I usually do, so I explain the formula to them, and I go, so how many people think the most important part is conscious? How many people think the most, raise your hands, the most important part is focus? And how many people think the most important part is action? Now, most people are going to raise their hand on action, I found, because we've been told that we're supposed to take massive action. And I absolutely believe execution, is everything when you get to execution. However, the part that I find most entrepreneurs leave out, and it was really, in many ways, the part my dad was, because my dad was a workaholic and he was a very bright person who was very entrepreneurial in that he could tell you where the money was going to be made, but he didn't set up good systems. That was one of the real factors that I came in. I'd been good in school. I didn't know the word system at the time, but I set up ways to handle payroll, ways to do billing, policy manuals for all the drivers to keep them from doing the things that I didn't want them to do so that they were more efficient and they had to show up on time, those kind of things. Is that a lot of entrepreneurs, the biggest tendency, because entrepreneurs tend to be driven people who really want to get results. I mean, that's the typical entrepreneur. So they want to get out there and want to start taking action right now. But if you haven't taken time to consciously think through both what your top priority ought to be, because that should be your number one result. So that's the priority is your result you're going for. And how you can get there and what might be the pitfalls and the upsides of all the different ways you might get there. And you just start taking action. That action may have nothing to do with anything that you really want to accomplish because you haven't even defined the result first. all that happens at the conscious stage. So from my perspective, the conscious stage, including your mindset, the belief system changes, and we should probably talk about that for a moment, that's your 80%. As important as execution is, if you're not executing the right things, then the execution's meaningless. In fact, it's just a waste of assets and time, money that you're draining going in the wrong direction, because you're not even headed someplace that is really where you want to go, because you didn't take time to define it clearly.
Would you say they're 30, 30, or 33, 33, 33? They're all equally
No, I'm saying
or?
that the conscious is 80%. And that's radical, because that's not what you're going to hear from most people. Most people are going to say the execution's 80%. And I think the execution's critical. But if you don't know where you're headed and you don't know your options for getting there, the execution is meaningless, because you don't know what you're executing. You're just wasting time taking action, going in all kinds of directions. That is why I find a lot of entrepreneurs aren't as successful as they could be. It's not a lack of working their 60 hours or a lack of a drive or desire. It's not being focused in the right direction because they haven't taken time to clearly define that.
So I guess you could be going a million miles an hour in the wrong direction, or you could be flooring it in your car and spinning wheels in your mud and be going nowhere because you're not doing you haven't done the conscious and the focus part.
And people don't want to take the time with the planning part, because for a lot of people that's kind of boring. They just want to, let's just go take action. Yeah. Well, great, but what's that action all about? And is it going to take you? And are you taking 10 actions when 3 were all you needed to take? Are you wasting a lot of energy? So it isn't getting lost in the planning part, because I tell you, when I sit down and I go, okay, let's do the business model and the 1-year plan, and by the way, let's do it in seven days. So I'm not suggesting you take forever at this planning stage. I'm suggesting that you do it really well. You put 7 days really into creating an initial, whether you are starting a new business or you want to ramp up to a new one, you need to look at your whole business model. And then you need to look at a plan for your 3 goals and your plan for how you're going to get there in the next 12 months. And here's the reason I think you need to get started fast. So this is going to almost sound contradictory to the whole idea that you need to be conscious of where you're going. The steps that you think you need to take are almost guaranteed to be inaccurate. They're going to be wrong. You're going to have to iterate. The person who wins is the person who puts together the plan in 7 days and gets going. Because so much of what you're assuming is going to be right, you're going to find out it was just wrong. It was wrong in some way. And so the person who really wins is the person who gets going and iterates the quickest. So that the next 7 days, they find out 5 things that they thought they were right weren't. But they find out 5 other things that are better than what they thought. And the only way you can do that is get out there and as I go, you've got to jump in the water. You got to start working with your clients and finding out, well, that really wasn't exactly what my clients wanted. But you can't know that by making it up. You got to go interact with the clients. And
so what about
find out.
What about the people who would say take action first and you can just course correct along the way?
Yeah, and that I would say you don't know which actions you ought to be taking at that point. So now you're like really going nowhere. Okay, so that's my argument, is that if you don't know where you're going, taking actions is not a great idea, because the chances are you really aren't even headed in the right direction. Whereas if you have a result you want to achieve, let's just take a financial result. Let's say this is your first year in business and you want to achieve $100,000 in profit. That's for a lot of people a very doable goal. But if you don't know who you're working with or what kind of products or how you might want to achieve that, and you haven't even defined that that's what you wanted, and instead you're just going to go out here and start taking a bunch of, I got to get started with my business. But you don't have a strategic outcome. You don't have a result that you're laser focused on. You don't even know who you're working with or what product you need to be working with them providing, because you never had a conversation with them to find out what they really wanted. I call that surveying. You need to go out and survey 20 prospects or customers. You can do that in a few days. That's cheap. You can do it on the phone. You can do it on the internet. I mean, you can do it in person. You need to go get some feedback.
And that saves you a lot of time.
That saves you a lot of time. But until you get that feedback, it's amazing. Every time I go to create a new program, I survey my group. And I ask them, what do you want? What do you want to call it? How long do you want it to be? What do you want to pay for it? And it's amazing because so many times, I don't mind telling you, I mean, it kind of proves the point. So many times my assumptions that I thought were really well developed, I'll go, oh, that wasn't what they wanted at all. Isn't it a good thing I asked? You know, they wanted it to be called this. I thought they might like this name. I'll tell you, you just got to ask them. And then go provide what it was that they wanted. But the starting point, I want to be sure I get this in here because it's so critical. It's a big difference that Conscious Millionaire is about, is that the traditional way, and I have the MBA, and it's what you're taught, and an MBA is what you're taught in most business books, is you go out there and you find out what's missing in the market and you provide that. Now, if that is your starting place, I think you're starting in the wrong place. That is an important element. But part of this first 7 days, because I'm not here, I can't work with all these, everybody is on the phone because, we're not in person. So here I want to put this out, is it's about, you've got to start with discovering your true north, and the elements is to get clear about what you're passionate about, what your sense of purpose, and an easy way to think about that, what's a difference that you want to make in other people's lives or organizations or in the world and society we live in, and what are your real strengths? What's your passion? What's the difference you want to make? What are your real strengths? And that becomes your true north, and you infuse that into your business. I know this is a lot real quickly, but just take this in. You infuse that by making that your business purpose. So that defines what your business is all about. In my case, it's about creating wealth consciously and empowering entrepreneurs to create a higher purpose and a higher profit for their business that fulfills them and makes an important positive difference in the world. That's what Conscious Millionaire is. Now that I know that, I now have a direction for my company because I've already just defined the kind of people I want to attract, that I want to find out what they need in order to take their next steps forward, provide it to them in a way that is consistent with the values of honesty and integrity, because that's what I stand for, that's what I believe in, and provide that to them in the way that they want it. Maybe they want it in a group coaching. Maybe they want it in an audio that they can listen to. Maybe they want to come to a live training. I need to find that out. Those are the kind of questions that you have to go out and find out in the real world by doing business. But until you've taken that time to figure out what your business model is, what your purpose is, who you would like to be working with, you don't even have a direction. And so any of the actions you would take is just a waste of time because they aren't headed in any direction. They're just actions. We can sit here pedaling on a bicycle all day long, but if your goal is to get to downtown and it's 5 miles away and you're going to stay on a stationary bicycle, you didn't get anywhere. So you first have to determine you got to get off the stationary bicycle and get on the bicycle that you're going to take outside your house.
And the one that's going in the right direction.
And then take the street that's going downtown.
Exactly.
It's really that's what I'm saying. It's that simple. But until you've defined all of that, you don't even know what direction to point the bicycle in.
Yeah. JV, what does the word empower mean to you? I've seen it in your books, and you've mentioned it a couple times here today. What does the word empower mean to you? Empower
means connecting with what is the authentic potential within you and owning that you can take that potential and do something with it. So it's owning what's possible for you. And what's possible for you a lot of times has to be redefined in your mind so that you move, for instance, from a scarcity mindset, which limits your possibilities and says that you've got to be out fighting other people and that there's not enough for you and you'll never have enough clients and you'll never have enough money, into an abundance mindset of realizing there really is infinite potential in the world. And then how do you take your strengths and the sense of difference you have and what you're passionate about and go out in the world and make your difference in a way that also brings you your profit? That to me is true empowerment. That you can go out there and claim a life that is right for you and that helps other people. You're empowered to make your difference and live the way you want.
What does a typical day look like for you? I know you mentioned being in Denver last week. So for everybody who's listening to this in the future, we just had Christmas a few days ago, and JV, you said you were in Denver and you've been traveling. But what does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, there's a lot of structure to it. I have a form that I use. It's actually in the book, but I'll describe it and I fill it out the day before, and I use it to structure my day. So the first thing I do is it starts with having a purpose for my day. So the purpose is to further one of my three goals. So one of those goals, I'll just give them out so people can think about this, especially since a lot of people will be listening to this around the beginning of the year, is that one goal is how am I going to empower my marketplace? How am I going to empower my customers at a higher level that transforms their lives? That may be creating new products. In my case, I'm launching a new membership site. I'm going to have a product every quarter that are all designed to transform entrepreneurs on a conscious path to achieving higher levels of success. Okay, the second one is a financial goal. So I have a specific financial goal in terms of revenues and profits for the year. And then the third one, I call this the goal that relates to your business acceleration. And depending on the stage that you're at, if you've not yet reached 50 to 100%, almost everybody just needs to track in. And for the most part, it's about marketing and sales. So my third goal for my year is around marketing and sales. And about 80% of our energy, because we've already put a lot of time into products, about 80% of our focus in 2014 is going to be on marketing and sales. Different ways to market the business. The books started launching, got bestseller in 12 days. We're going through multiple launches with the book. And with all the products, we're doing our first 3-day event. In my nonprofit, I'm doing my first global Conscious World Day in April. So I have kind of milestones, but they're all very clearly about that I have to market to get to them. You've got to get the attention of your prospects, and you've got to move them into beginning to do business with you. Because if you don't, you're never going to reach the first or the second goal, which is to transform their lives. I can't transform someone's life if I never touch them in some way. And I'm not going to make any revenue and profit if I don't have any sales. So the biggest thing that I find so many small businesses, for me, it's 80% of next year. 80% is focused on marketing in some way. And with marketing, I mean marketing and sales, because the two go together. That's my 80%. 20% is continuing to build more products and delivering them. I find that a lot of small business owners maybe are focusing 5 or 10% of their time, money, and energy on marketing, and it's the number one reason that they don't have enough revenue. I mean, if it's not your focus, it's not your priority, you can't be surprised that you aren't getting enough of it.
I have a odd question for you, JV, and this isn't one that I normally ask people, and it's kind of an odd one. And I don't think anyone listening to this would honestly think about this way, but I'm sure that, or thought about this, but we may have all come across something like this throughout our lives, dealing with politics and things like that. But have you ever said to yourself, "I've been wealthy for a while. I'm gonna step aside and let somebody else have their turn"?
No, and let me tell you why. To me, that question is founded in scarcity. It's founded in a view that, and it's a view that is very prevalent in our society. So I'm actually glad you asked it. A view that there's only so much wealth out there, and therefore, if I get more wealth, I've actually taken something that somebody else could get. And I don't believe that at all. And in fact, I can prove it logically. Wealth results from adding value to someone's life at such a level that they feel compelled to give you money because they got a transformation, they got a result, they got a relief of pain, they got a path to their aspiration that's so important to them that they want to pay you money. There's 7 billion people on the face of the earth, and I don't think there's any limit that any of us have individually, much more as a group of 7 billion people, into how much wealth, therefore how much value can be added to other people's lives or other businesses or organizations. So quite the opposite. I'm at a stage where I'm saying, I'm tired of being at the level I'm at. I want to play at a much bigger level because I want to take a portion of that money and fund a nonprofit that can be in 160 countries helping youth from 16 to 25 take conscious approaches to education, to finding their career or creating a business, conscious approaches to understanding finance, and conscious approaches to leadership. Those are the three areas I want to help youth with. I want to play at a level that I can touch millions and millions of people's lives through Conscious Millionaire and help further a whole movement of entrepreneurs taking a conscious path in which everyone can win. And by everyone winning, they actually win at a higher level. That's the synergy of it all. And that I want to further that. So quite the opposite. I want to play at a bigger level by helping other people play at bigger levels.
Good answer. JV, what was the last movie you saw?
Well, for Christmas, I bought myself Avatar. I bought Avatar DVDs right after it came out because I was so enamored with both the message and the technology. I was sadly disappointed. I guess that was 3 or 4 years ago because they didn't have any special effect DVDs. So I came across a DVD about a week ago, and so I wrapped it up and put it under the tree.
And JV, I know you have a special giveaway for the listeners, but before we get into that, my final question for you is, what is one tip or piece of advice that you can give people like me or the JV of several years ago who are just starting out? What's one tip or piece of advice that you can give us?
Well, we started talking about marketing, and we haven't had a lot of time to talk about that. So let's talk about marketing for a moment, because a lot of people get lost in how they should be putting their marketing together. So let's think of marketing as having three different ways to achieve an awareness with a prospect. And the prospect's just somebody who raises their hand and says, hey, I'm interested in your product. So let's talk about the three different avenues. You need to have some direct traffic, and that might be pay-per-click. So you're literally running direct traffic that might be paid for to a landing page, offering them something for free to find out if they're a prospect. And the moment they sign up, they are now legitimately a prospect because they've said, hey, we're interested in knowing more about what you're doing. The second way is to have some kind of affiliate marketing. So you're going to need to have a product that's at a price point that you can find affiliates who will send out your email to their list, and that list will come and sign up and buy that product. Now that's going to be usually a much better quality lead, and in this case the lead becomes a customer immediately, because if you choose your affiliates because they're relevant, because they have affinity, because you all share common values and something in common in terms of what you offer, now you've got high relevancy, and so the person on their list would likely be someone who would be right for your list and your community as well. The longer-term phase, or whether it's the first 3 or 6 months, you aren't going to be getting as much, but the 6 to 12 months, you should be doing incredibly well. I'm putting a lot of resources into organic SEO marketing, and some of the things that fall under that category, because a lot of people go, oh, that's just keyword research. Well, that's where it starts. And so you've got to on-site have your pages optimized, but that's just the beginning. The real powerful part is doing what we're doing, being a guest on someone's podcast, a guest on guest blogging, backlinks. That kind of SEO organic has a longer uptake, but it also creates a longer tail in that you're really connecting and giving quality information before the person comes. So they're much more likely to want to stay. So to think about your marketing in terms of that, you need all three of those. That you need some fast marketing that's going to come maybe from pay-per-click. You need to be doing joint venture affiliate marketing, and you need to be doing some strong organic guest blogs, guest podcasts, articles, all the different SEO techniques that over time, and over time I mean 6 to 12 months, are going to really build well. But at the initial part, you've got to invest in them to get there.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, tell us a little bit about the giveaway that you have for the listeners of the Empowered Podcast.
Well, sure. What I've done is I've taken my book that hit bestseller status in 2 categories in 12 days, and I've made a mini version that's about 60 pages long. The whole book's 320. So I want to give you a mini version of the book, and then 30 days of my new member site that we're bringing up that has 17 videos in it, plus training calls, resource expert interviews, blogs on the topic of the month, and give 30 days access to that as well. So all they have to do to get that is just go to consciousmillionaire.com, and Ellery. So it's ELLORY, consciousmillionaire.com/Ellery. And you'll be able to get access to downloading that mini version, the Kindle version of the book that's going to give you about 60 pages. And you will also get an invitation to get 30 days free access to the membership site.
JV, thank you so much for your time today. If someone wanted to reach out and connect and say thank you for being on the Empowered Podcast, where should we send them?
Just send them to consciousmillionaire.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Empowered Podcast. It's been a pleasure spending time with you today. I'm your host, Ellery Wells, and don't forget, leave me a rating and review in Stitcher or iTunes. Head over to empoweredpodcast.com, and I look forward to seeing you next time. And here's a taste of what's coming up on our next episode.
The key is persistence. I don't care how intelligent you think you are or aren't, or how capable you think you are or aren't, or how experienced. These things are all largely irrelevant next to persistence.